video. What you just viewed are scenes from the new release game, Grand Theft Auto 5. For years, video games have been getting a bad rap because of the amount of violence a person is exposed to while playing them. But are some of the complaints misplaced? Since becoming hugely popular in the late 90s and early 2000s, video games have become increasingly violent. From shooter games to survival horror games, violence and gore has been a constant and in some cases exceedingly so. There are no doubts video games can sensitize a person to these types of things, but can they really make a person violent? After all, how often do people place blame on more readily available and sometimes equally as violent mediums like music, movies, or TV shows? In fact, a recent study by Drs. Christopher Ferguson and Cheryl Olson found that not only do violent video games not make high-risk teens more aggressive, but actually have a very slight calming effect in those same teens. Now we'll discuss violent video games. What are some of the more violent video games people at all ages flock to these days? What are some of the things that do in these games that could trigger alleged aggressive behavior in people? Nobody can discuss violent video games without at least mentioning the poster boy of violent video games, the Grand Theft Auto series. Grand Theft Auto series is a series of video games set in a different time with groups of people from all walks of life. You play a gangster in Grand Theft Auto San Andreas and an immigrant searching for the good life in America in Grand Theft Auto 4. But the thing these games have in common is violence and vulgar language. For instance, it is the norm to walk down the street in these games and fire RPGs at random cars or run people over with your own car. You can even hire prostitutes for their services and kill them seconds later to get your money back. And if a cop is standing in your way, you just shoot him. This is Grand Theft Auto, a game blamed perhaps more than any other for its violent ways and influence it has on young minds. But Grand Theft Auto isn't the only violent game. In fact, it wasn't even the first. Grand Theft Auto just managed to do it more than all those that came before. There are hundreds of games just as violent. Games where you control a character with special abilities he can shoot from his hand with grisly results. Or a game where you can control an engineer who fights his way through aliens using a gun to bloodily dismember very quick and often grotesque aliens. But can a work of fiction be blamed for somebody carrying through with some of the things mentioned in real life? How can video game violence be considered an alleged contributor to violent behavior in adolescence when movies such as The Expendables get slapped with an R rating due to its extreme violent content? Violent movies and television shows have been around long before violent video games, and our youth are inundated with graphic scenes of violence and even violence in song lyrics. Television shows, movies, and music are much more accessible to today's youth due to the high cost of purchasing video games. Nevertheless, video games have been given a much worse rap in comparison to other mediums. However, there have been no reported crimes of prostitutes being run over on sidewalks in the United States or people being dismembered with a rail gun. Contrary to common opinion, video game violence has very little to do with aggressive, violent, or criminal behavior in an individual. According to Julia Shaw, a lecturer of forensic psychology, defenders of video games have a seemingly compelling counter-argument. The vast majority of individuals who play violent video games do not actually engage in real-world criminal behavior of any kind. In fact, despite the growing global popularity and engagement with incredibly violent video games and extreme media portrayals of violence, violent crime rates in many Western countries have actually been falling over the last decade. There has to be pre-existing psychological disorders or imbalances for a person to commit the types of crimes video games are blamed for. There is no substantial proof of recorded incidences of violent crimes copycatting those found in video games. People that commit violent crimes normally have underlying depression or sociopathic behavior. It is not exposure to video games, but rather a chemical imbalance in the individual. Many studies have been done to determine the effects of violence in video games contributing to violence in reality. There is just no substantial proof to support this link. On the contrary, video games have proven to be helpful for people with ADD. Some studies even suggest that some types of video games actually make a person more intelligent. Until there is a definitive connection between violent video games and violent behaviors, we should let video games be exactly what they are, strictly for entertainment. Thank you.